The Nigerian government, through the Federal Inland Revenue Service, FIRS, has introduced the VAT Direct Initiative, which will facilitate the collection of value-added taxes from the informal sector while reducing multiple taxes in that sector. The FIRS is collaborating with the Market Traders Association of Nigeria to implement the initiative, utilizing unified systems technology. The association has a digital platform that provides digital ID cards to its members and helps to track their turnover for VAT collection and remittances to the FIRS. Additionally, the initiative will also address the issue of multiple taxation by partnering with security agencies to curb the activities of intermediaries and unauthorized tax collectors in the marketplace. A conversation that's generating a lot of conversation online in Nigeria, and we are tackling it right now with one of the best to do it. Joining me for more on this is Taiwo Oyedele, Fiscal Policy Partner and Africa Tax Leader at PwC Nigeria. Taiwo, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Tolu, for having me.
So off air, we had started talking, but let's bring the conversation on air. So we know in the lead up to President Tinubu's swearing in, we've been talking about what space he has, the fiscal options, the monetary options he has, and we know that taxes were coming. But in terms of all of this, we're now here. So this also comes after the announcement of the car ownership certificate, which is to be renewed yearly, and now taxes heading straight to the informal sector. With the moves by this administration, do you think we should be bracing for more before we get into the nitty-gritty?
We should. While this is not a new tax, it's a new way of collecting the tax that has been in place since 1993. So this is about 30 years now. But because the level of compliance in Nigeria has been generally very low, and even more so with the informal sector. And it's not that they're not paying taxes, just that they're not paying it to government to a very large extent, to non-state actors, touts, and all manners of people who don't apply the taxes that they have paid towards any benefit for the taxpayers. So this is now trying to find a way actually to convert the formal taxes to non-state actors into formal taxes that will go to government, and hopefully that can then lead to some, concrete benefit that people can see for the taxpayers' money that they have paid.
So when you note that this is a tax that is not new, some 30 years old, but also note that because of these non-state actors, we have this situation. Don't we also expect that there's a level of blame that government itself should take? Not necessarily this administration, but government as a continuum. There's been obvious tax leakage, there's been non-compliance, and then there have been informal and, of course, non-state actors who have then been a stoppage, a gap, or rather an obstacle for this money getting to the government. So it's not that the informal sector hasn't been paying taxes, it's just that that money hasn't been getting to the government.
That's exactly correct, Tolu. I think, to be honest, I'll give 100% of the blame. I will assign it to government. And if you do exactly what we're doing in Nigeria, in any country in the world, whether it's the US, the UK, whether it's Germany, you will see exactly the same results. So you're not going to have 200 million people and they all wake up every day and they say, because of the conscience that I have and because of God, I'll do only what is right. It's unlikely that will play out in any country. So you have people who want to take advantage of the system, and that's why you have a government. So it is the duty of government to protect every citizen, including operators in the informal sector, against extortion. That's number one. Number two, it is the duty of government to ensure that the taxes that are being imposed are legitimate taxes. Those taxes make sense, and those taxes are harmonized, not imposing so many taxes that even if you want to do the right thing and pay all the official taxes, there will be a lot of fatigue along the line. You get exhausted, you don't have the money to continue, and you start questioning yourself whether it's a crime to even do business. So all of those are issues for government to address, not any individual, not an association. They can try, but it's really government to do that. The failure of government to do that over the years is something that they should accept the blame for 100%. And now that they're beginning to take steps to address those problems, I think we commend them for doing that. They just need to make sure that it's well thought out, it's effectively implemented, and there's no abuse, either by government officials, including tax officers, and maybe even the traders themselves not taking advantage of the people, because sometimes what you see is people are looking for the excuse just to hike their prices, and they blame it on something. With the petrol subsidy removal, the price of a liter of petrol went up from like 200 on the average per liter to around 500. And then many of them just increased their transport fare by the same percentage. I said, there's no way you can do the calculation of the costs of transportation and fuel is 100% of it. It's impossible, right? So you may find someone would then quickly increase their prices and blame it on this VAT. The point is that this VAT, in fact, will not apply to over 90% of the traders covered by this arrangement, because there's an exemption of 25 million naira per annum. If your turnover, that's your sales, is less than 25 million naira a year, by law, you're exempted from charging VAT or remitting it to the FRS by law. In addition to that, even if your turnover is more than 25 million, but you're dealing in basic food items, rice, beans, yam, plantain, or you are dealing in medical, items, equipment, and medical materials, pharmaceutical materials, you're also exempted. If it's to do with educational materials, you're exempted. Fertilizers, baby product, the list is long. And those items are usually very popular with MSMEs, traders in particular. They will be exempted. So at the end of the day, you are left with a small percentage of the traders who need to really account for VAT in any form or shape. And for those who have to account for those VAT, the law also allows them to reclaim the VAT they had paid when they were buying those items. For example, if you are selling a mobile phone, when you buy the mobile phone, they would have charged you VAT. Maybe you were not paying attention to it before, but they must have charged you VAT, whether it's imported or locally produced. When you're now selling it, you charge VAT, and that which you paid before, you can recover it back from government. So effectively, you're only charging VAT on your own margin. That is the profit that you make. If you bought an item for 50,000 and you're selling it for 60,000, you only charge 7.5% VAT on 10,000 profit. So the impact on your selling price will be very minimal, somewhere around 1 to 2% effectively.
Anticipated increase that many of us have. And I think, of course, it is, as you said, people taking advantage of the time, but also a lack of clarity around this. So I want to come back to something because I think it's very important we have numbers. It's obvious that with this tax that is not, of course, being introduced, but reintroduced and probably refined, there's a target attached. But when we talk about this target, we also need to understand the strength of Nigeria's informal sector. If you're saying that now about 90% of what possibly constitutes Nigeria's informal sector will be exempted in some way, what are we looking at? What's the picture? What are the numbers really in terms of this? So how big is Nigeria's informal sector? What is it made up of? When we look at the numbers coming in, what does it contribute to the GDP? And if we're having a 90% exemption for those people who fall into this definition, what are the targets that we really think will likely be the target that's provided, and what really should possibly come in the next year or so?
Yeah, very good question, Tolu. So I have to say that in Nigeria, we don't have data that you can take to the bank, close to your 2 eyes and say, that's it, right? But the numbers that you see everywhere, whether it's MEDAN, NASME, Bureau of Statistics, and also this, MATAN, is around 40 million MSMEs. It may be more, it may be less, but then if you drill down into that data, it shows that around 97, 98% of that number is micro and small, not even medium. So micro and small businesses would normally have turnover that is below 25%. So even my 90% is an understatement. So I think if you drill down to the data, about 98% of those people would not have to pay the VAT. Reason being that they're too small to cross the threshold. But it doesn't mean that government is losing the VAT revenue. So what has to happen is that very small businesses tend to either produce what they sell, in which case it will be a basic item that they're producing. If they bought what they are selling, chances are that they are buying it from large firms. So when they buy from the large firms would have already charged VAT. So the only VAT that government is losing is infinitesimal, it's insignificant. It's not even worth the time to account for it and file the returns. So that's one aspect of the conversation. The other aspect is even if it's only 1 or 2% of that population that you can pick. So take 40 million, and then you take 2% of it. You're already looking at about 800,000. 800,000 is massive. If you get 800,000 businesses that are bigger than 25 million turnover per annum to all pay VAT, that amount is going to be significant. Not only is the amount of taxes that you collect will be material, it's also that you get significant data, because you're not going to ask only those people to give you information. You need everyone to give you information to even determine that they were below 25 million in the first place. That information you are collecting from the informal sector is extremely important for economic planning and for policy formulation. One, to try and support that very important sector. And one of your questions is, what's their contribution? They contribute more than 50% of the GDP and close to 80% of the employment. So this is an all-important sector of the economy. And it's the case everywhere in the world, even in the developed economy. So getting the data to support that sector is probably one of the biggest things you can do from an economic management point of view. So this is, in my view, a good move.
Okay, so let's come back to who government is saying they're going to partner with. So as we spoke earlier, there's a conversation around non-state actors who have been in some way acting sort of as informal tax collectors. But now government is partnering with the Market Traders Association of Nigeria, which does have a setup. It has members, it has ID card, it has data to some level and points. But yet this is Nigeria and the government again using a third party, again, a non-state actor, in already places where this sort of situation and setup works. Do you have any concerns about how government wants to go around this direct tax initiative that they're setting up?
I don't. You're right. Government is still not as organized as we'd like them to be in terms of identification of individuals and businesses. So I'm hoping that we get to a point very quickly in Nigeria where the only identification that an individual will have will be the NIN issued by NIMSTI. And the only identification that a company would need or a business would be the registration with the Corporate Affairs Commission. That is the ideal situation for a country, but we're not there yet. So which means in the interim, whatever opportunities you can find, particularly when those opportunities are voluntarily provided. So this arrangement is not that the FRS is taking police to lock up shops and then they sign an agreement. No. So these MATAN, the Market Traders Association of Nigeria, on their own agreed with the FRS to say, let's work together. So that collaboration in itself is extremely important because it means it is voluntary. Because it is voluntary, and MATAN has a platform, and I believe that platform will be a very simple technology platform because you can't expect their members to be sophisticated enough to deal with the FRS's own system, which they call Tax Promas. And they don't have the resources to hire professionals like me to help them deal with it. It's going to be more than the taxes they even need to pay. So having a system by MATAN just to capture the identity of the traders and then their turnover, it's good enough for a start. And then that platform of MATAN can then interact with the FRS in a very simplified format. So this situation will be government to control all data and use only government officers to do their tax compliance. But as a stopgap measure to get to that ideal situation, I'm absolutely fine with collaboration with associations such as MATAN.
All right, so let me ask you this because you did mention it in terms of that breakdown, the equation you were doing for me when it came to where the VATs would be and how many people, how many businesses in the long run would really be involved. And you did, of course, talk about the associated costs possibly being pushed to the consumer. Is there anything that can be done to stop that cost? As you used the example of the fuel situation and how transport costs immediately went up, what can be done to make sure we don't see this arbitrary increase that some might use this opportunity to put on their goods and services, saying that it's because of government taxes?
Excellent. So there are two important things that government must do. The first one is education and awareness. So you need to educate the traders. Somebody needs to go there and not speak the kind of English we are speaking here. somebody, somebody needs to go there and speak Pidgin, Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo, right? And explain to them what I've just said now in a way that they would understand, right? So that way they have the right knowledge. That awareness and education also needs to go to the general public. That's the role of the FRS to do that. So that's the first thing. The second aspect of it is what the FRS already said in their own press release, which is that as part of this deal, they're going to use the powers and the might of government to ward off the touts who are extorting money from these traders. I can tell you, and there have been loads of research that have been done. These guys pay a lot of money. In fact, sometimes they pay more than those of us in the formal sector.
In employment,
1,000 today, 500 tomorrow. Before you know it, in a month, they're paying 20,000 sometimes. If you help them push that away, the amount they have to pay legitimately based on the law for VAT will be a small fraction of what you've saved them from. In that case, they can use that savings to accommodate this little increase from VAT without passing it on to their customers. So those are the two ways I think that this can work without creating more problems for Nigerians who are already struggling to a large extent.
And that's really where my last question is. Very quickly, Taiwo, we know Nigerians are struggling. We've seen the numbers with how many more Nigerians have been pushed into poverty. We've seen the numbers with businesses that have also closed as well. So when we have this conversation about taxes in Nigeria, it's a very difficult conversation because Nigerians don't want to hear it. They don't feel that they see value in paying taxes, or they see their tax money, naira and kobo, at work. So when it is what the Tinubu administration is pushing, some form of increased revenue from taxation. Again, coming back to this car ownership certificate that will be renewed annually. Even if it is just 1,000 naira, I'm already proving to you I have this car last year. Why do I need to prove I own the same car again? But when you talk about these taxes, what can the administration do to really start rebuilding that social contract with Nigerians when it comes to this issue of taxation? Very quickly as we wrap up.
Yeah, very important. So by the way, I completely disagree with the 1,000 naira for vehicle renewal. Based on principle, it's completely wrong. Based on design and implementation, it doesn't hold water. So it's almost like taking Nigerians to be like, they're not smart enough. We can tell them anything and get away with it. They're all over the world. You have registers for vehicles that even shows not only the ownership, but transactions on that vehicle that you can easily access. And you already charge us for this. Why don't you have it in place? Why do I have to prove that I own an asset every year? So clearly, I'm hoping that government can discontinue with that. Otherwise, it doesn't help the system. Now, to your question, yes, you're right. So you're at the point where you want to raise revenue. People are struggling. Many of them are poor. They don't see enough exchanges for the taxes they have paid. That needs to be fixed, and it's not one before the other. It has to be that they go hand in hand.
Yes.
As they're collecting the money, be providing the benefits. So I expect that government should come up with a plan that shows that across markets in Nigeria, provide, for example, public toilets, clean drinking water. If you can, provide internet access, right? So as they begin to see the benefits, in fact, you will have to remind them before they pay the next time, because in any case, they're having to bear those costs on their own, which means there's implicit taxes that if you aggregate it together, it's actually more than they should be paying officially to government. So this is a typical example of what you call a win-win situation, where the people pay less, government collects more, and then we all see the benefit for paying taxes as part of the social contract.
And we will be hopefully putting that pressure on the Nigerian government and the administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to make sure it happens together, simultaneously, and of course concurrently. Taiwo Oyedele, is always a pleasure as well. We will continue these conversations, and we'll see if they hear us about this car ownership certificate annual renewal conversation. It's one that many people are taking up, and we'll see how far it goes. Thank you as always for joining me.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.